Hi everyone, my name is Elgard and I'll be your chair for today. For this exhibition for NUDC Nationals, the motion reads, this house believes that evil should not be characterized as banal. Without further ado, we welcome opening government. Here.
Hey, Chuck, am I audible?
Audible.
Okay. Um, right, so gender pronouns here, him. For POI, just drop it on the chat box. Gonna prioritize closing for close bench. Gonna start my speech in three, two. So when evil is characterized as banal, the things that are most likely going to occur are things like people stealing and they justify it because they say that I don't have anything to eat. Or if they do something bad, they can blame the external circumstances saying that, oh, I'm just following my um, leader's order and I don't have anything in my control to stop it from happening and all of those things. It basically suggests that every single ordinary individual without malice intent can do extreme evil stuff from the get-go. So I think the biggest harm that we can pose it in this debate is on how when this becomes pretty much normalized, when everyone is capable of doing it, regardless of your background as an individual, then I think no one can be determined as truly guilty, especially with how this narrative took place that I'm going to maximize later in my further part of my speech. But nextly, how does the narrative are actually actively weaponized by people who have power from the get-go. Because I'm going to argue to you that the characterization of evil as banal are usually weaponized by people with power. We're talking about a trigger warning, Nazi, when they do all of those crime wars, war crimes, for example, they can justify all of those killings, especially the subordinates and every one of them. They can say that I don't have any power to do such things. They basically shift all of the narrative, shift all of the guilt that they are supposed to be held accountable with, saying that, oh, it's not within our control and something along those lines. We say that this kind of world is very much unfair and we prefer a world or we want that evil should not be characterized as banal. How does our world gonna specifically look like? Number one, the first thing I just want to characterize to you is that we will not say that every single evil action is equally bad on our house. Because just like the status quo, I think spectrum of quote unquote evilness do exist. Someone can be punished to a difference with a different severity according to how much guilt are they, how guilty are they, or how much control they have over a certain circumstances and something along those lines. Which means that it's not going to be a one shoe fits all solution to someone doing bad things, for example. But it's going to be more on the spectrum, but we just do not want people to hide under this kind of justification on their side of the house. There will be two different arguments in my speech. Firstly, is regarding the accountability measure and why the characterization as banality pretty much limits the accountability measure. But secondly, is regarding the macro impact on structural changes and the law system in general. So the biggest misconception or the biggest weaponization that people use of this characterization is how when you do something bad, the first reflex is to blame externality instead of owning your mistake, instead of doing evaluation of what you as an individual could possibly do to minimize the harm. We will characterize to you that vast majority of people in most scenarios, even in all scenarios, arguably, fell into evil action because they comply without deep reflection, not because they have no choice. How does it look like? I think even in Nazi concentration camp back then, people who are like tasked to kill individuals on the ground, they have active control not to do it, for example. But they just comply without deep reflection because they can always hide under justification of it, that it's my leader's order and something along those lines. It means that the first benefit we want to pose it to you is when they no longer have this characterization, is that people now rely more on their conscience, not just following all of those orders from the get-go. This argument is important and debate winning because I'm going to argue to you that in vast majority of cases, talking about countries where they are oppressing the civilians, for example, or countries where an inequality happens and something along those lines, people who actually, like the government apparatures who do all of those things, can only do all of those things because they just comply with the leader. So when we don't have this characterization, we're going to minimize all of those impact exactly because they have deeper conscience from the get-go. But secondly, and more importantly, I think in like personally or like internally as an individual, you also have more control over yourself to not feel guilty because arguably this individual who follow leaders from follow like orders from their leader also feel guilty to a certain extent, but they have no capacity at all to use their deep conscience because of all this characterization from the get-go. So the impact is that big. But most importantly, is regarding how it impacts the victim in the principal level. I'm going to argue to you that in all of those holocausts and all of those crimes that are happening, the impact has already been done, felt by the victim, and it's massive in most instances. And the very least that they can do is to let the perpetrators be held accountable, to be imprisoned, for example, because of their compliance, because they do not want to make a right decision and because they just comply with all of the things without deep reflection. So arguably, this argument is debate winning because we give you a better accountability measure to the victim as well. It's a side of like how we minimize. So like even if the harm is done on our side of the house, there are more legal grounds to hold them accountable exactly because they cannot hide under all of these things. But before that, I'm going to take the PR from closing.
Yeah, the context slides say banality of evil claims that great acts of evil can be committed by ordinary people. This means you are defending the wrong side.
Right, but I think the next argument on my speech is going to talk about the structural changes and lawmaking system. I'm going to pose it to you that in vast majority of cases, structural changes is something that are important exactly because it can only be done when there are people under like on the lower level of governance and whatsoever that understand that such things do exist, that such problem do exist, and something along those lines. But the problem with the conception on their side of the house is that people do not even realize that the problem exists exactly because they're just forced to comply and they don't have the capacity at all to pretty much make a structural change and so on and so forth. It means that in vast majority of cases, structural change cannot exist because people who have power or have control to minimize all of those harm do not even have the realization of all of those things. So the implication is that the inertia of all of this bad situation happening is not going to be minimized and it's just going to keep on continuing for like for future and whatsoever. The comparative on our side of the house is that when they have more realization, it creates a more awareness for those individuals that I can be held accountable to all of these bad things that have happened throughout to the minorities or to all of the vulnerable actors who are objectified by the bad policy making and so on and so forth. So the internal realization becomes an important tipping point in this debate exactly because it is the prerequisite of you to create a structural changes. It manifests into them stopping from following the orders, or it manifests to them trying to protect the vulnerable actor because I think arguably humans have conscience and they need to be made aware that they do have the decision and they need to be held, they can be held accountable if they just comply. Very, very proud.
Thank you for that speech. We welcome Leader of Opposition. Here.
All right. Let me set my timer first. POI prefer minute 4 or 5. Prefer from closing. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Personally, I believe that not all mankind are evil, but they are capable of do something evil out of the blue. What does it mean? Even if I have a best friend in my college, we always hang out together, and I trust him to keep my secret. This doesn't mean that some conscious thought in my own head keep reminding me that your best friend could backstab you for their own goals, such as the first one in class or etc. Right? There is a benefit of evil. At the end of the day, no matter how close you are to someone or how far or distant, you always have something in back in your mind to remind you that this specific person that you may trust or not trust may be someone who could do something can be categorized as great act of evil. So those are our setups opposed. So what does our setup then, Dutch? 3 point of setup. First off, what does evil in this context mean, right? You do something that is very immoral in the public eyes. This could be from forgery, so you can get a promotion in your own job, or blackmail, so you can win against your other politician during election year. This also could cover murder or even etc. All that being categorized as great of evil. Second off, promoting their own events. What does it mean by promoting their own events in the system, right? The reason why someone doing this action of great action of evil can be, so for example, like from seven deadly sins. Maybe they're envious. They want to do great of evil, so they can get ahead of competition, so they can get more promotion, get more wages, or maybe they are greedy, so they do pickpocketing, or they do or they do example battery, so they can so they can fulfill their own um a desire for to getting more things, etc., etc. So this is what this mean by promoting advancement in the system. Third off, so how does the people or the house we react to this concept in the daily lives? 2 points. First off, this mean, as I mentioned in my opening, this mean people will still aware that no matter how close you are to your friends, no matter how you close towards other people, you still have to keep in mind that there may be people who can create that may do great act of evil in the future. But second off, you will have some kind of setting mechanism imposed towards the person that you are being friend with. This means you have your own bubble. This means you have your own shield to make sure that you're not going to be hurt if some kind of the future is the people going to backstab or doing something horrendous in the future, right? This doesn't mean that we're going to teach people do not have friends. This doesn't mean we don't teach people to do not find fun family. We're still going to make sure that people have that. But our house will teach people to make sure that the thing that you should prioritize is yourself first, and then you can prioritize other people. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, the thing that you rely upon in this earth is yourself, right? So what this proposition brought to the debate then, Judge? They brought about on how mastermind of the crime have some henchmen to commit their own crime. This may understand opposition, those henchmen can shift the blame towards the mastermind compared to give the accountability towards the henchman itself, right? There's three point of set respond to or research. First off, I do agree. But at house, those powerful mastermind would be held accountable. But how does the henchman will be held accountable under the governing government? Second point, right? Under the upcoming government, the most likely would happen is exactly because the notion of you're not capable, not everyone capable of doing some kind of great evil. Exactly because there's no concept of banality of evil. This means under the upcoming government, those kind of henchmen under the proportion will shift the blame immediately towards the mastermind. Because yeah, if we're not being pushed to solve, we're not going to this kind of action. It's not our fault. It's the scenario. It's the external variables fault, right? This could happen under the proposition. But point, how the house will have more accountability towards the henchman itself, aka give them more punishment, aka give them more justice that they should be deserved, right? Exactly because everyone has the same method, have the same foundation of doing something evil. Because we have our own ego, we have our own desire, etc. This mean if the henchmen do really want to do this kind of action in the future or doing it right now, this mean there should be held accountable because exactly there's no difference of you being pushed around to do this some kind of evil action and other people who are not being pushed to do this kind of evil action, right? Both scenario, both actor in the status quo have the same desire, have the same push. Exactly because you do this kind of action, this mean there's no excuse for you, right? Because everyone else don't do this kind of action, but you do as a henchman. Before continuing to my argument, is there any POI? Yeah,
Uji,
OG.
you cannot push the accountability to your mastermind because they can also justify their bad action because we are forced to do such things as well. It means that no accountability can exist at all on your side.
That's gonna happen to the house, right? Exactly because not everyone has the same parameter. But outside the house, because everyone can do this kind of potentially evil things, this means those mastermind itself could be also be held accountable. Exactly. You're a mastermind, but the other person in the street is not a mastermind. Exactly because of that, you should be held accountable because you cannot control your own desire. You cannot control your own sins, right? So because of that, I think because of that, I think it's already answered the POI from OG, right? So what's our argument then, Judge? 2 points. First off, more accountability towards the perpetrator, and second off, incentive to people. I'm sorry. The first argument is about incentive people to do preventive action, and second off is more accountability to perpetrator. So first argument, right? Incentive people to do preventive action. The bitter truth is, Judge, as I mentioned in my setup, we live in this world alone, right? Not everyone can rely towards their family. Not everyone can rely towards CGS, especially if you're you're coming from developing or underdeveloped country, or you're the majority, if you're the majority citizen within a country itself, there is example racist or etc. This means just outside the house, teach people to make sure that they should believe themselves first. They should prioritize themselves first, right, Judge? What if what happened under the proposition if you do this kind of stuff blindly trust other people, right? 2 points. First off, if you truly if you it's under the proposition, if you don't believe the concept of banality of evil, exactly because you think, example, my best friend would not do something evil exactly because they are my best friend. If there's some point of time the person going to do something evil, not only first off, you're going to be a sense of denial exactly because they cannot do this on the action. So this means you're going to justify their action, action destroying your life or other people's life. But second off, the other than just you're trying to justify their own action. But second, they exactly have the leverage of your own incentive life. This means they can utilize it to achieve their own faster. Example, they know your secret, they're going to spill it through social media or blackmail you, so they can move ahead towards compared to you. That's why outside the house opposed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that speech. We welcome Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, let me know if like my voice suddenly gone. Hold on. Yeah, should there be any POI, please just like raise, no, like chat. Hold on. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Adolf Eichmann was a normal transportation manager for Nazi. He didn't make any moral judgment of his own moral compass. He didn't even question the authority that he was to obey, but he was the one who enabled the Holocaust that happened because of him, because he is the one who enabled the transportation system. This is exactly our stance. This is the banality that opening government is exactly opposing. What is this kind of banality? It's the absent-mindedness of people, the spontaneity that you can blindly follow your order from higher power, for example, the blind compliance that people do, or basically them trying to justify 100 things of their own circumstances just to justify the evil action that they do. All of this is exactly bad, and this is what we don't want in status quo. What we want in opening government is we don't want evil as banal. What we want is for people to understand that when they do evil, it's 100% their own agency. It's 100% their own choice, and it's an active decision that they make. We think that this is exactly the problem with leader of opposition speech, because I don't understand the correlation of how then people being held accountable so easily when they are trying to say that there are 100 reasons why they're doing evil when they can justify their ability with the circumstance that they are with right now. So the problem with opening opposition's case is they could not contextualize how do people even make a decision of being evil, and this is exactly why they lose inside of this debate. In our side, we want people that does evil to be accountable. We want them to, immerse towards them being guilty and making the act of evil. We don't want to shrink the act of evil. We want them to own it. We want them to get all of the costs and also the hatred that maybe come with them when they're doing it. My argument will surround around this idea. I will tell you why this will eventually going to be it's going to be impacting individual, which eventually will comes to my second argument why this will be very important, especially when you want a structural change. First, let's talk about why is this going to be very impactful, especially for human and also individual, us as a person. I'm going to open this argument by basically trying to tell you and characterize to you how does people make a choice of evil. I'm going to tell you that people make a choice of evil when there's a situation where they have no choice. How does it look like? It's hard for you to get money, or instantaneous money. You don't get a job, for example, you make this as an excuse for you to steal. You want to get a promotion, so you manipulate people at work. You are trying to lick everyone at work, and this is basically belittle your friends at work and your coworker whatsoever. People are basically using all of this ability, evil acts as a shortcut for them to justify their own long-term wants. And this is exactly what we don't want in the status quo. We don't want your sob story, or basically your long-term goal as a mean for you to become evil in the status quo. What we want is basically for them to rethink all of their decision. We're not saying that, hey, the world is going to be a better place when we characterize evil as inherent, but at least people in our side of the house is going to be more mindful. At least they are going to be making an active good choices in our side of the house. How is that going to be true? I'm going to give you a characterization of how people are doing evil. When there's an unfortunate event, they make an active decisions to be evil because they think that this is going to be justified for them to do so. But in our side of the house, at least when they know that if they instantaneously do something that is evil, they will get all of the repercussion. They will be shamed. They will be seen as a very, very wrong person. They are the embodiment of evil. At least in our side of the house, there is an active choice for them to opt for something that is right. They will rethink all over again because they know the permanence of their own impact of what they do right now in order for them to achieve their goals and whatsoever. This is the characterization that basically doesn't being engaged by the opening opposition, and this is what we mean by responsibility and accountability, especially in an individual. What happened in the status quo is there are a lot of loose choices in which you can do evil and you justify it. In our side of the house, it's a very simple choice of whether or not you want to be seen as a bad person versus you have to make this good active decision to become a good person. We think that this is an active incentive that doesn't happen in any other cases. This is a very fundamental idea, especially you as a person. So at least in our side of the house, we increase the likelihood of a person becoming a better person. We try to we try to eliminate them trying to instantly being evil. We give them a chance because they know how the permanence is in the status quo. Comparatively, this will not happen at all in opening opposition because they could blame 100 other things for their banality, because at the end of the day, this is not 100% your fault. So in our side of the house, evil is not banal. When you pickpocket, people will automatically point fingers that you are a bad person. People will definitely give you law to practice the criminal justice system. People will see that you're a bad person whatsoever, and we're good with that. Second of all, this is very true, especially the characteristic. No, this is something that is true as well, because the characteristic in the status quo, or like the society in the status quo, also pushes this idea, especially when you have religion. For example, there's a religious push that bad is because the whispers of evil. At least in our side of the house, no, this is because of your active decision. So at the end of the day, we try to simplify, the law, because the case of Adolf Eichmann that I've told you in the beginning of my speech is basically a hole in the law. We don't have any laws for people that blindly comply. So they make up laws. They make Nuremberg trial. They kidnap Adolf Eichmann from Argentina, for example, and they make all of this because he did something that is banal. So in our side of the house, this comes into my second argument that is going to be quick, by the way. In our side of the house, when we posit that something that is wrong is embedded towards a person, at least this is going to simplify a whole process of law. Whether or not, you do it because there are 100 reasons behind you, versus actually blaming them for they do because this is an active decision. They're a grown-up person whatsoever. So accountability in our side of the house is not only individual, but it's a structure. This is exactly the whole that is coming from the opening opposition when they don't try to engage into our individual argument. With all of that being said, very proud for OG.
Thank you for that speech. To close the opening half, we welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Alright. POI, please just unmute yourself. Prioritizing from closing. Hold on just a second. Okay. Starting my speech. Oh, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. People who do bad things don't think that they are evil, even fully believing that their actions are fully justified. Banality of evil is needed to snap people out of the mindset that you have to be evil to do bad things. I want to question OG's counterfactual and possibly even CG. Because if you don't characterize banality as evil, and you don't hold the cover and you don't cover like the full spectrum of accountability and culpability, what happens on the government bench is exactly that you only hold those who are the most in control to be the most accountable, because people don't believe that ordinary people are capable of doing such evil things. And that's exactly why we need the banality of evil, and I'm going to go into it in my two constructives. Two things in my speech. I'm just gonna clear up the debate. Firstly, what happens to the perpetrators and how this affects the perpetrators. Secondly, how this affects the victims. Firstly, on how it affects the perpetrators, I just want to clarify what banality of evil looks like under opening opposition. Our model is never either or. The narrative of banality of evil exists alongside other narratives, such as maximum punishment equals direct involvement. We can have both. But what is unique about characterizing evil as banal is that exactly you hold those people who seem innocent, or those people who seem like they would never do such a thing, to be accountable and to actually shine some of that direct blame onto them. Exactly when OG brings this kind of like entire case of them of like banality of evil being absolving like culpability, I think this is wrong. Banality exactly doesn't excuse your behavior. It does the opposite. And this is what OO has been clear on. It points out that exactly you are ordinary. You are capable of this action. Even I am, even you are. And it's only through this banality of evil that is the prerequisite to every single accountability argument and like kind of measure that they want to bring under OG. What happens then under our side of the house? I just want to contend with OG here. Firstly, they claim to you that this is going to redirect blame and justify since there is no malice intent. I hope that my clarification with just now cleared up why the banality of evil exactly will hold you accountable, because like now you kind of like make it clear that ordinary people are going to be complicit. And exactly, we actually we agree with OG here. Yeah, we do need to hold those kind of like people who are complicit, even though they're just following orders, accountable. And that's how you do it, through characterizing that evil is banal. If you don't characterize evil as banal, counterfactually on OG, the only people that is going to be held accountable when war crimes happen, when unspeakable acts like say like some kind of assault happens, the only people that's going to be held accountable are only those who are proven to have malicious intent. Exactly when InfoSlide tells you that even though these people do not have any personal intentions, just because they have like that kind of motive to kind of like advance their own social standing in the society, or because they are very or they're like serving their own self-interest, that's how you can hold them accountable. You make it clear to the society that the thing that's going to make you culpable is not only malicious intent, but also your complicitness and also like your compliance to like whatever is happening in the status quo. We need the banality of evil to cover the spectrum, especially when the info slide characterizes that this kind of great evil will most likely mean like, I don't know, like some kind of like war crimes, or like it happens in like those kinds of contexts that my leader of opposition has already brought.
Yeah, I see.
Uh yeah, sure. Moving on. Yeah.
Alright, I think that's exactly the problem, no? In the current situation where you start to like make evil as banal, you give everyone a moral excuse that everyone can do great evil. And suddenly no one is responsible because everyone is culpable and everyone is just as ordinary.
I don't think that's how it works. Just because everybody is capable of doing bad things doesn't mean that everybody, when someone is doing a bad thing, it means that like that bad thing doesn't exist. It just means that everybody is capable of doing that, and that's exactly why we need to hold everybody accountable to that. Like, just because I don't know, just because everybody is capable of doing great things doesn't mean that when somebody does a great thing means that that great thing becomes invalidated. Same thing goes the other spectrum. I also just want to like bring another thing that under how it affects perpetrators under government bench, exactly because like their counterfactual is that they want to hold people accountable, and like how are you gonna get people to acknowledge that they are doing something bad if you don't break them out of the mindset that like I'm doing this for the greater good, I am justified in doing this. You need to break them out of that cycle by pointing out that hey, you don't have malicious intent but you are doing a bad thing. But exactly, but also like there the other thing that the deputy prime minister mentioned about like giving people a chance, I don't think this is like super important to be addressed in this debate, because I think the context is that these people committed something like really great that impacted society as a whole irreversibly. So I don't think that person deserves a chance to begin with. But also secondly, if we want to talk about reformation, then I think that banality of evil actually does better to solve this. Because if you characterize someone as being ordinary and that they are capable of doing bad things or good things, you don't get you don't have that like black and white mindset that this is a bad guy, that is a good guy. You are ultimately unable to be resolved. You are not worthy of repentance. If we kind of like reverse that, then I think that's how you can do repentance at least a little bit better. Very quickly on victims, I just want to say that the banality of evil actually helps victims in a sense, because under government bench they have this kind of like narrative of forgiveness, because people only feel justified to feel angry or to feel like this person is deserving of culpability because this person has malicious intent. If this person doesn't have malicious intent because they feel like they're fully justified to do so, then I think it's gonna be difficult for victims to feel justified in asking for reparation or feel justified in like holding them accountable, and like the victims feel gaslighted into feeling like their pain is invalidated because the person is not evil, they're not malicious, they're not like a cartoon villain. So like by characterizing banality as evil, you kind of humanize the villains in a way, and like you kind of bring a lot of nuance to the pain that these victims are feeling, and you validate that, since yes, that person did not mean to hurt you, but they did. So it does kind of like serve that. Proud to oppose.
Welcome, member of GOF.
Okay, am I audible at this volume?
Yeah.
Cool. If you want to QI me, you can unmute yourself. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the fault in opening bench is that they don't really go deep into what actually happened through people's mind. I think they assume that it's going to happen that way. For example, they jump to benefit of harm. So on opening government, they say that more people will become evil because they don't think. But that's just an assertion that there is no evaluation whatsoever in your mind. Same like opening opposition, saying that, oh, we will have accountability to the external actors, but why would people go that way, and why would that be the conclusion that they end up getting to? So CJ's contribution is going to be two things. First is that we're going to tell you the implication of the saying that evil is banal is that it lessen the threshold of doing evil, in the sense that it became easier and the occurrence of it become more often. So that's what it means of the motion. And I'm gonna tell you why it's gonna encourage more bad behavior overall, claiming what opening government has said before. Second is that I'm gonna tell you the flip side of it, which is that where we believe that to do evil actually requires active effort, and for you to be able to stomach a certain kind of violence and to be okay with it, in which no ordinary people should be able to do that unless something is like pretty wrong with you. And I think that's important because like, comparatively to opening government, I think they have like this setup of an extreme case of like NUDC, for example, which I think also that it's factually true happened, but I think we need to widen the scope of the debate. And I think opening government also needs to bring question about what is the comparative that you want to get on your side of the house. I will go to rebuttal. So this is towards opening opposition. First thing that all say is that accountability is going to happen to external factors, and they say that this is going to like specifically target powerful people, which is good when we can ask them to do like the correct thing when they are in position of power, like government or companies. So I think what I want everyone to realize in this debate is that the underlying assumption for that argument to fly is the logic is that since anyone can do it, i.e., evil is banal, but only few people actually do it, means that it's not their fault, but it must be other factor. However, this cannot work for two reasons. First is that assumption of like, well, it must be the other factor. I think it requires an element of the ability to criticize, in which we believe that it does not happen because there is going to be normalization of evil behavior. I mean, why would you randomly believe that it is the fault of the government if you believe that it is something that inherently happened within you and within other people? It is an everyday life. It happened over lunch. Um, um, so that's first. Second is that I think people instead is gonna believe that it's a random occurrence. Like I think it is the easier assumption. You're not gonna tell, oh, person A do crimes, but person B doesn't because the fault of the government. I think you're just gonna say, well, it's just so happened that all of us just has that potential, but we just don't always bloom that way. So I think that's an easier assumption. Not to mention if these are characterized of like extremely powerful institutions. So going against them is gonna like need more resources. So it's harder. So you tend to jump to your conclusions. So I think this better than opening government through battle because OG only saying, well, there is CGS and like you're still gonna blame the people, but I think it's unclear about how it doesn't engage the core logic that opening opposition is trying to offer in the debate. I will take opening opposition. CO then.
Exactly, not everyone doing evil. This mean they have sense of control. Perpetrator will be sentenced easier if they don't have some control.
But the idea of control on your side is that it's unclear to what extent people can control because it's about the situation. I.e., if you feel like you want to be opportunistic that you're going to do it, so it happened internally either way. So it's still an external. I will move on then to my contribution. First, the implication of when the threshold of doing evil is lowered. First is that the amount of people that do it is going to be more because in your mind, no matter whether it's like factually correct or not, but the perception of it is that since it is easier, then average people can do it. And since like statistically speaking, more people fall under the average category, so more people in your mind is going to be able to do it or is capable to do it or even want to do it. And this means that it has more occurrence for it to happen. It happened in several timelines. It happened in several circumstances. The implication of it is that I think you are going to think about evil things more often. So like I'm not gonna jump to OG and say like people will suddenly be bad. I think that would just be like pretty unrealistic, not to mention all the NUDC examples. But I think the simple idea of you thinking more about it is already bad because there is no immediate blaring red signs when you think like, huh, I kind of want to like hurt these people. Like you don't think something is inherently wrong with you. You think like it's fine, but like you should think that oh my god something is wrong with me if you think about that. So since you don't get that blaring red signs, you play around with that imagination. So the first step is that you don't feel bad about thinking of violence. Second is that you tend to do it more because so like the first step is that you don't feel bad. The second step is that you gain satisfaction from thinking about it. You feel like you deserve to get good things in life and other people don't because I should like be fighting for my own interests and I also deserve good things and therefore you feel like you are entitled to certain things even at the expense of other people. So it began with petty things, it began with thinking, but then it escalated into you like I don't know, maybe doing petty things like backstabbing your coworker in a meeting in the workplace. But then like it escalated. You feel like why not do more? Why not get more from my company? Why not actively steal, for example, because you believe well the company is enslaving me anyway. So I think that creates that like staircase that allows you to be more and more bad. Not to mention because we have a certain bias of like feeling like well morally superior. So the second flip side that I want to talk about is that I just don't think that it's I don't think evil is banal. I think it requires a certain ability to stomach violence because as I've said before, like there are plenty of opportunities for you to pull out of your evil plan. Like you could have just decided not to, but you decided to keep on doing that. So that active actions means that it is not banal. Something is inherently wrong with you. I know that opening opposition say that, well, but we want to comfort people, ordinary people. Like, don't feel bad if you, I don't know, maybe kind of feel like hurting your coworkers because they're annoying. But I think it actually needs to be shamed. Like there are other much more healthier ways for you to process your emotions and process your feelings of injustice, like talking it out, like thinking about how to resolve the actual conflict. So I don't think that's the solution. I think therefore we need to realize the active effort to do that means that something is wrong with you. And I don't agree that we cannot like tell something is externally wrong, or we cannot criticize, because you can realize that something is wrong with you, but realize that it is caused by external circumstances, i.e., the fact that if people have gone through hardships, it's kind of not their fault to want good things in life and to be desperate. But you need to still consider that it is not normal, it is not ordinary. You are evil, not your fault, but because of external circumstances, but it's still not banal. So I think that element of evaluation can still happen throughout the course.
Thank you for that speech. We welcome member of UP. You're here.
Hi. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. To summarize the debate as it has gone through so far, the majority of openings debate was locked in about how basically people will be able to self-correct themselves and deter their own consequences. But one thing that I find is important to point out within the entire opening benches argumentation is that it's extremely convenient for them to extensively only discuss regarding the victims of the situations. They kept talking about all of these people, like the henchmen who are maybe forced by their like bosses or like other people to comply with their rules, or like they gave examples of Nazi soldiers that were quote unquote said, "Oh, we were forced to do that." But I feel like it's extremely convenient for the opening bench to almost completely leave out the masterminds themselves, or the people who are actually doing the wrong, and they know that they're doing wrong. That's why they go to great lengths to cover it up. Their lengthy characterization only really applies towards the victims, where they say that, oh, it's a result of shallow thinking, it's a result of a one-time lapse in judgment. That doesn't necessarily cover the idea of banality of evil. So that's why I think that their lengthy characterization, their argumentation for that, doesn't necessarily fit within the things that we should be arguing about, because the henchmen themselves are actually they're not the biggest part of the problem. It's the masterminds themselves, because those are the people who are actually creating the majority of the suffering, right? It's not the henchmen that the henchmen do carry out the suffering, but it's because they felt that they were forced or coerced to by the masterminds themselves. They don't acknowledge the fact that these masterminds oftentimes are aware of like how evil they are. They don't acknowledge that these masterminds typically do it with the recognition that they are going to make other people suffer. That's why I think that that's why the opening bench's case was a little bit weird in that, but also responding to what the closing government has stated, talking about how, when you don't have banality of evil, when you have banality of evil, because you can excuse yourself by saying, oh, since everyone else is evil and you act, then you sort of justify acting evil yourself. They talked about how, oh, you don't necessarily feel bad about it. You feel like you're more entitled towards certain things. But I don't think that's naturally how people gravitate. I don't think that's how people naturally like process those sort of things. Just because you understand that other people are evil, that just because other people are evil and have the capability for evil, it doesn't immediately make you this paranoid person who immediately sets out to kind of get the first step before everyone else. So I don't think it necessarily, like they illustrated it, makes you more likely to do bad things, as they wanted to say. They also talked about how, like when there is no banality of evil, it makes it easier for people to recognize when there is something wrong with themselves, because they're not going to be able to hide under that. There's like their whole line of reasoning. But my question then becomes, how will this actually how will this type of reasoning and self-correction actualize if the concept of the non-banality of evil makes it difficult for them to recognize that they themselves are certain individuals that are equally capable of committing these kind of things? Doesn't the non-banality of it all instead make it easier for you to find an excuse, because you believe that it truly does take an evil person instead of an ordinary person to end up creating these great acts of evil, right? But moving on from all that mess, let's talk about the extension and how actually for closing opposition, we feel that our main distinction is because the entire debate up to this far has only exactly kind of talked about how the implementation of this is going to be within a society. They've talked about, like the process of self-actualization, self-correction, basically trying to prevent yourself from being the worst person that you are, the impact towards society itself. But us from closing opposition don't necessarily believe that that's the best scope to talk about it, because we don't because as much as banality of evil is, and like the idea of like self-correction and everything, we still believe that at the end of the day, you know, a human's actual drive is to want to be selfish. They do actually want to defend themselves no matter what. So no matter whether or not banality of evil exists, we don't think it's necessarily going to define how it's not going to change the fact that an individual is always going to put themselves first. So within the context of like public or social good or social benefit, it's not as beneficial as everyone has made it out to seem, but it is extremely beneficial within a court of law. That's how we're going to talk about it. Why? Because a court of law is actually like one of, you know, it's an actual formal court. In a society, you don't necessarily keep track of who's doing what. You don't filter through every evidence when you want to punish someone socially. Most of the time it's taken like from what you feel as a society, from how you feel as an individual towards a person, right? But in a court of law, because there's a formal setting, you do have to like process things formally. That's when the banality of evil can actually be taken into its full account, and that's where the benefits of it can actually, the impact of it can be fully actualized. That's why we believe that the focus of this debate should have actually been within a court of law, right? But then let's talk about how this in itself makes the process, the banality of the idea that you are an evil individual, that you are an individual capable of evil, makes the whole criminal justice system.
Joy.
Not right now, sorry. Because a lot of times within the criminal justice system, it's a very lengthy procedure that's, you know, very draining towards the public resources and private resources itself, because you have a lot of argumentation about how, there's no way that this person could do it. They are presumably innocent, right? So that presumption of innocence already harms our criminal justice system by like extending that stress and that like resource depletion. So if you have banality of evil, that naturally assumes that people are immediately capable. You don't have to argue all of this and question all of this immediately again. You can just immediately move to arguing that this person has done it. You don't have to presume innocence within this case. That POI, I'll take it.
It's after 6.
Okay, sorry. Okay, and then moving on, it also talks about how when we are able to give that same, because we understand that every single individual is able to sort of act on its own, therefore we don't believe that there are naturally like innocent people. That's when we're able to give the same level of consequences onto the regular people, not just the people who have higher rankings. I don't think this was necessarily something that Opening or other people have talked about, because they've only talked about how henchmen are also culpable, but they haven't explained the mechanism as to how within a court it's likely that the processing as to why the banality of evil allows us to prosecute them or hold them more accountable.
Order.
Very proud of those. Thank you.
All right, to close the Gov Bench case, we welcome Gov Whip. You're here.
All right, I hope my voice is loud and clear for everyone that wants CPOI. Feel free to just unmute yourself. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. First, I think this debate was never about how evil will happen or how we will decide how we will judge evil. It's about how we understand evil and what are the understanding of this evil and what it does towards human morality. On the side of government, I think we believe that evil should be something that remain extraordinary, not because we think that this is not something that all people can do, but because society can only survive when people still believe that being good matters. Because when evil becomes ordinary, when it becomes banal, I think the distinction between human flaws that ordinarily still exist and extraordinary evil disappear. And I think when that lines disappear, we lose the very normal compass that keeps humanity decent. So the key question that all of you judges should be deciding today is whether we should see evil as something that is extraordinary or should we accept it as something that is being part of human life. Let's see on what OG and OO did on Opening itself, right? From OG itself, we heard that evil should not be banal because that framings undermine accountability. They told us that when perpetrators stop feeling guilty, victims are disrespected and the justice system weakens. I think we agree with OG's idea of moral instinct, but they stop very short there, right? Their case remain external on how it undermines accountability. It's about laws, punishment, and institution. But this debate talks more about what sustains morality. They never explain to you what sustains morality before law step in about humanity itself, right? But from opening opposition, we hear the complete opposite, right? They tell us that people are selfless, that evil is ordinary, and that by accepting that, we make people much more realistic, and that people will preempt evil, right? Notice how contradictory that is. You cannot say that people are selfish and expect them to preempt evil. Because if morality is reduced to self-interest, what possible reason will people have to restrain themselves from like doing nothing or evil at all times when they have that, right? And I think that's a logical gap where CG step in, right? The contribution my member make inside of this debate is very simple but fundamental. We explain to you why people actually do good things and why they stop themselves from doing any harm, right? Humans act morally not because of law, but because on the first place, we have a moral self-concept, belief that I am a good person. And that belief is what makes guilt painful for people, empathy meaningful, and that morality is real, right? The moment you tell that people is banal, that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil, that everyone is a little bit of a devil, you erode that self-concept. My member exactly proved that point, that the moment you think that way, the threshold of evil is then lowered. People stop seeing themselves as good and start seeing morality as something that is arbitrary. They stop trying because they think moral greenness is inevitable. And that exactly proves OO's entire idea is unpredictable, right? Because when you see yourself as something that are evil, guilt disappears, empathy disappears. People stop restraining themselves, not because they want to become evil, but because they do not feel that good is important, right? This is how you get moral apathy. And in a world where all people look away from like suffering, justify small cruelties, and focus on only their selfishness and their own self-interest, we say that exactly what OO tells you is the direct clash, right? But again, let's talk about what are the things that CO bring inside of this debate, right? CO basically brings two things, right? First, that people won't just copy evil, so we don't have to worry about normalization. But also second, recognizing the banality of evil actually helps the justice system itself because it lets the courts process evil. I think their entire idea is a little bit similar to OG, where they basically talk about the CGS system. But what we must understand is that CGS actually does evil on stuff that are protected by the law. That there are a lot of things inside of this world that are outside the control of the law itself. And those are the things that are controlled by our sense of morality. So before law exists, what exists is the people itself, right? Because law are shaped by the shared value of people. Once you believe that people are capable of extraordinary evil, what will then the court cases like judges on the people, right? Basically, the whole entire idea also contradict with OO, right? Breaking the opposition bench whole entire unity. Because if OO is right, morality will collapse through normalization. But like if CO is right, then their entire pragmatic justification disappears. Because if people aren't that easily corrupted and that you can judge people by CGS itself, why not just frame it as what happens in the current situation? That evil are not something that is capable by ordinary people. Hence, we use the extraordinary means, which is law itself, to restrain those kind of people, to actually ban those people, right? Because again, like they have explained, like you require a lot of like long process of evidence and stuff like that. Exactly because of that, we believe that those are the things that we should do towards people that are the extraordinary people that actually do those evil itself, right? So how should you weigh this entire debate, right? First, I think by mechanism itself, right? Who explains moral behavior better? OG basically says that law deters evil, just like CO. O says that self-interest does. We tell you that moral identity does. My member has basically proven to you that the only mechanism that can apply universally to everyone, because like law can probably exist differently towards like nationality, but human cooperate and refrain from harm even when there are no laws or no punishment and no witnesses, because moral identity that tells yourself that you are a good people will restrain you from doing evil behavior because you do not want to be associated with that thing. But second, on skill, right? Who protects people much more better? In OO worlds, maybe it can help like a few individuals to like rationalize their guilt and suddenly realize that they are evil or stuff like that, where it does happen. But at the end of the day, it also normalizes the fact that people can do evil, that everyone view themselves as evil. And that exactly proves my member point on it lowers the threshold of evil itself. In CO's world, yes, it is true that on their world there might be much more CGS. People will start to like see law through a very rigorous process. But I don't think that's something that can only exist on CO world. In in our world, it can exist, and even on two metrics. First, on society level, there will be judgment because people will see themselves as good, and they'll judge people's action that they see that are outside of their good moral compass. But on our hand, CGS will still exist on our side of the house, because that is basically the essence of the entire shared value of what we think is good. And the fact that we believe that evil are something that is done by extraordinary people, that means it's going to have a much more bigger deterrence effect on the people and a much more better CGS. And that's the foundation of altruism, civic trust between one another. And that's why we think that we win on scale, on who can protect people much more better. But third, on moral clarity, right? What are the world that we really want to shape inside this? In the OO's world, evil will be ordinary, but so is apathy, because people will just focus on their self-interest. Altruism no longer exists because they don't see themselves as good people. They see themselves as evil people, ordinary people that can do evil things. In OG's and CO's world, basically evil is punished, but only externally through CGS. But on our side of the house, we want that double layered of things, where internally we will feel guilt because we want to be that good people, because we have that belief, but also externally CGS will still exist. In our world, evil remains extraordinary, not because we deny human weaknesses, but because we need that distinction to remind ourselves that we should always be better. So proud to propose as CG.
Thank you for that speech. We welcome opposition whip. Here.
Check, is this good?
Yep.
Okay, PY, please do it through chat. Yeah. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I do think this debate gonna need a lot of clarification, because I don't think any team understand what the debate really is. Closing government lose the debate because this is not a debate about whether or not we believe that humans are inherently good or evil. Because the context slides say that banality of evil means human beings are capable of doing something evil, but never said that human beings are completely evil and can never be good. And this is where the distinction from the understanding of the motion really clear in closing opposition. What we said in closing opposition as a stance is that we never say human beings are inherently bad, but what we say is that human beings are capable of doing something bad, and it is up to you to control whether or not you can execute those kind of evilness thought in your head, or whether or not you're able to control that or not. OG also lose because OG basically flips stance in the debate. So this is where I will picturize the world and map what the world of banal evil really look like. The understanding goes two ways, toward yourself and toward society. What does the understanding toward yourself really look like? You are evil, but so does every other person are capable of doing something evil. This means the perception of moral will include the control of evil, the control toward human selfishness. What we say here is that since humans are selfish, and in some instances are being admitted by the narrative and the norm that humans are able to do something that is evil, the prevention then become more massive, because humans never really want to be quote unquote being stabbed on the street simply because they understand other people are capable on doing something evil. Suggestively speaking, preventive method of getting harmed through evil is something that exists. Assume that closing government is correct, that everyone can do evil and quote unquote will do evil conduct, for example. I just want to question what is the societal consensus will look like in their side of the house. Because the societal consensus that will exist in our side is that strengthening security, protection, or even tough on crime, for example, is something that likely to occur. But I just want to say this is not the most likely word, not the most likely scenario. The most likely scenario looks like understanding you can be evil, internalization and continuous reminder that you are evil, and self-control even through your thought, for example, being implemented in the process. In the school, you are being told that you can be evil, you can thought something that is evil, you need to control, and you have that sense of guilt from yourself. This is direct challenge, by the way, toward closing government. Because if government whip want to say that, well, the only way for us to control our thought is by understanding that we are inherently good. The question here is that what is the standard of good in their side of the house? Because if their standard is moral is subjective, and in most instances will not be discussed at all in their side of the house. Because that means in government side of the house, you believe that human being independent moral decision is inherently good because it is not driven by personal interest, but rather any other factor that is outside of their own control and outside of something that is inherently evil. This suggests that whatever they thought, whatever they do, for example, will be subjectively determined as good or bad in their side. The question here is that moral standard that is inherently subjective will come into clash when you bring it out toward the society. What happened in our side is consensus and discussion, where you understand you can be wrong, you can be the one that is thinking something that is evil, and other people can do something like that as well. This means the process of understanding what is a good moral standard will happen in our side of the house. What happened in their side of the house, everyone will be defensive, because they say that I am the one that's moral because I think I am moral because I'm not capable of thinking something that is inherently evil, for example, so on and so forth. This means exclusive control and mechanism to control whether or not individual understand a good moral standard exists exclusively in opposition side of the house. When this is very, very crucial, because we want people to understand every single action that we do have consequences not only toward ourselves but also toward other people in our surrounding. And this is a good process of making a good social cohesion, because what happened in the past that create a bad social advancement is that people never really understand that our selfish interest that might look good to us is actually hampering the other people's ability to feel good or to have a good life. What is the example of this? The simple example is the social advancement and demonstration on the street in the modern society always fail because of internal clash conflict, where people that do protest on the street decided not to come up to the protest simply because of the fear of getting kicked out from their corporation, or simply because of the deal that being conducted by the leader of a company, for example, toward the leader of the protester or demonstrant, for example, so on and so forth, or simply because of the threat of quote-unquote being kidnapped by maybe authoritarian regime, like what happened in Philippines, for instances. This suggests that all those kind of quote-unquote social advancement and the historical procedure is something that will be missing in terms of check and balance in their side of the house. Because we need to admit that the way we comprehend narrative and norm is through historical story of human being in the past. That through the long human history, we understand what evil and good really is. That's how modern standard create those things. Before I continue on this and basically connect it to court, yes, closing government.
Regardless of whether or not it is seen as extreme or ordinary, I think like prevention of harms would still happen on either side of the house. You have self-preservation instinct, for example.
That is actually correct. But the problem here is that, so here's the thing. Preventing from criminal justice system probably is not a delta. Tough on crime probably is the delta. But preventive mechanism of your thought, basically the argument from member of government about thought of evil is inherently bad and you can pleasure from that can only be prevented once you understand that you are capable that to understand that that is something that is inherently evil, and not living in your own bubble and isolation to think that this is not something that is inherently evil. Yeah. Let's talk about the long history process and whatever that thing is. Unfortunately, the investigation process of the historical misconduct that we have within status quo focus on truth and reconciliation, giving amnesty toward people, for example, simply because the narrative they're not doing something wrong. It's probably a bad thing that happened in the past, so on and so forth. What we argue in our set of house, because now you can create example that these are the example of people that are ordinary but have something that's capable on doing something evil. You create a standard where you cannot do the same types of misconduct. This is why investigation and restructurization of probably authoritarian regimes that for the past long created like atrocity, for example, like probably military in the United States, is something that can change in our side of the house once you understand and create the consensus that they are capable, and in the past create a type of standard and pattern that these are the source of the evil thought that exists from ordinary person like the cadet, for example, and something like that. The problem that we have within the status quo, why every single institution never being reformed, is because we never really see the cadet. We always see the lieutenant, we always see the colonel. And that's where the problem begins. And because of that, evilness shouldn't be associated only to the higher ups, but also to us. And guilt is the one to control it.
Thank you for that speech, and thank you for the debate, everyone.